Which one? Is you see this green one? Oh, it's like, I think that means yes or something? I don't know. Are we good?
Test for echo.
I see someone doing this.
But the screen's off, so that's the issue.
Oh, it's off. So I guess we are not good.
We're sort of building anticipation, big feverish pitch. Just,
Oh, we didn't, we do it.
Does that come out?
It came out.
I guess
think it was,
screw it in there.
so it's not that we are ready to go? Okay.
Okay. Welcome, everybody, to this final group of sessions. Thank you for coming. This title of the session is Preparing Global Citizens for the Grand Challenge of Immigration. My name is Jim Ford.
And my name is Gemma Punti.
And what we're going to do is talk about this grand challenge of immigration. And also, it's kind of interesting because I don't know how, we'll see how it works with this room. We're going to have a little bit of discussion time, perhaps. But first things first, before I actually even go through the agenda, which is all this talk about grand challenge. It's the big thing. What do we mean by grand challenge? Just go nuts. Let's make sure we're on the right path. Any ideas? Okay. Cheat sheet. A course that focuses on a grand challenge, and we're focusing on a course, addresses important global issues through a solution-driven interdisciplinary approach to learning. So that's, and as we'll talk about, we had this interest in immigration, and it's almost kind of after the fact, but we realized, well, this is a grand challenge, clearly marked as such, and we sort of brought that into the course. Agenda, our course on immigration, and provide at the outset a little bit of context for that, and then have not really table discussion, but seat discussion of a sort, see how that goes. Purpose of which is to ask y'all some questions, and we sort of bounce off of that and kind of have that inform the rest of the presentation. Part called Connecting Objectives and Teaching Strategies, and then we have some student learning and examples of final assignments, and then finish off with any comments or questions you have. I can do this.
Talk about your mark.
Okay. So there's the course in all its glory. Humanities 4721, upper division. Has a rather unwieldy title, perhaps. Immigration, Refugees, and Medical Humanitarianism. That's a lot. It's a special topics course, and that being the case, it's not a regular part of the curriculum. We anticipate that it might, however, at the Rochester campus. That's where this is being taught. That's where we're teaching it. So UMR, as some of y'all know perhaps, focuses on health science, and we felt that this course could also add to some other efforts on our campus to promote cultural diversity and issues of global medicine and cultural humility and so forth and so on. So we came at this course from our different interests. And Gemma has some background in the study of immigration. I do not, however. But it's a timely and relevant course, for sure. It has been for quite some time, all over the world. It's always a big political football. The question of immigration in the United States, especially during a political year, will always be the case. Other parts of the world, we talk about the Syrian civil war and the big migrant crisis of Europe and things like that. So this is obviously a relevant topic for students. Our background and interest. I don't want to take a lot of time with this, but it requires a little bit of this discussion of how we got into this and how our backgrounds inform the course. So I teach history and humanities, and I usually teach topics that are rather most foul and loathsome, I'm afraid. Topics of genocide, ethnic cleansing, those dark aspects of political violence. And in so doing, I'm interested in cultures abroad and also humanitarianism. And so we brought that into this course, medical humanitarianism. It has a connection to immigration because, as you'll see, we wanted to have a global context and a holistic context, looking at where immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers come from, and what's the context before they get to our shores. We focus on the United States, of course. We do look at immigration policies elsewhere, but focus on the United States. So where do these immigrants come from? And you can introduce yourself, your background.
So my background is in education, and my focus is in immigration. But I also, I've been focused on the health experience of immigrants in the United States. So based on my interest and knowledge, I was able to connect with Jim. Like UMR is a very small campus, so we all know each other. And we discussed this course, it's like we should put our interest and knowledge together, and not to try to be experts in the topic, but facilitate learning and bring questions and discussions on the table and in the classroom. So it was about mutual interest and deciding to do this together. He's able to bring the context of history and what's happening in these countries of origin. We focus especially in Minnesota, so our students particularly learn about the Somali, the Hmong, the Cambodian, especially the immigrants that we have in campus, and also in Minnesota, and then we connect to the US and the overall world. But we particularly want to connect it to our reality. So yeah, that's my background.
Okay. Again, a little more context, which is more preparatory. I mean, the focal point, base of our discussion is this course, but it's not about the details of the course, but rather what kind of topics we engage in that and issues in the classroom that can be more universally applied to perhaps what you're engaged in as well. Objectives. We pretty much had two ideas for this course. One is transformative learning, and the other is empowerment of students. I don't know if you want to address that.
Yes, I think one of the main reasons we decided to teach this course is because we realized that first it was a need at University of Minnesota Rochester. There is not a lot of exposure or courses that address a global perspective, intercultural competence, and immigration. Actually, there is no other course at UMR that talks about immigrants per se, like as a focus point. And we have quite a bit of ethnic Somali or first, second generation immigrants at the university. And what was one of our objectives in this course was the idea of transformative learning, which is very academic, but the idea of like making the students to change or question the way they see themselves and others. That was especially focused towards the white students of our university, but also a sense of empowerment and work on their identity of the students of color or who are first or second generation immigrants. And that was one of our main objectives, and we will see at the end of the presentation, I think that was something that the students really work on and they really learn and felt thankful about that opportunity they had in the course.
So again, that being the case, we do focus on immigrant groups, not exclusively, but a focus of immigrant groups in Minnesota, and thereby offer opportunities of empowerment for students from those cultures in the classroom. Global context, mentioned this before, and we'll kind of flesh this out later in the presentation as well. Again, we're focusing on the United States, but we're looking at where these various immigrants or refugees or asylum seekers come from and what the context of their itinerary ended up being, and offer a little bit of comparative studies too, looking at immigration policies in other parts of the world, select parts of the world that we have some interest and knowledge in. Okay, and last thing, interdisciplinarity is key, and we'll say more about that actually. So, okay, so how do we want to do this? We envision kind of round tables. Doesn't matter, improvise. So we have some questions here, and could be the case. Some of these you've thought about before. Some of these questions are kind of rooted in the literature, pedagogical literature, to a certain extent. So please reflect on and discuss in your area the following questions. To what extent do you disclose your personal views to students in the classroom, and why? Again, we're kind of addressing teaching a course on a grand challenge and maybe some of the challenging, difficult issues that emerge in a classroom like that. Secondly, what are some difficult, challenging, controversial questions you've discussed in the classroom, and how do you approach them as an instructor or educator? And then finally, what is a grand challenge? And we had our cheat sheet definition earlier, but what is a grand challenge that you would like to teach or do, in fact, teach now? What would be your approach in teaching a grand challenge? So if we can take a little bit of time.
And I just want to make the point that the reason we chose these questions is because those were questions that we discussed before teaching this course, that we thought like those are important aspects that we need to decide how we want to teach this course and how much we want to talk about our political views or positions about all these issues that we are going to address in the classroom. And so we want to hear where you stand there, and then we can kind of respond the way we've done it in our course. Mm-hmm. So maybe since some of you are spread around, could you create some groups or go together and answer or discuss these questions? Obviously, there is no the right answer, but discuss these questions, and then we can hear from you and talk about how we approach that. Thank you all for engaging in the conversations. I'm sure you could be talking about this forever. But maybe what we could do now is kind of like, if some of you would like to, we could go question by question, or we can go about some of the main points you talked that you want to comment about it, and we can listen to your point of view and then discuss it together. I know it's going to be difficult in this room, though. I don't know how we can hear you. Maybe you'll have to stand up and yell. Any of you want to share your view? Like, we could start with the first question.
And it could be, I mean, some of these, the first two are kind of interrelated, so it could be,
Yeah.
We had some great conversation that ranged from terrorist attacks to law enforcement to politics in Mexico to you name it over there. Playing devil's advocate in law school.
And it's not all just faculty. We also have administrative people that we have to recognize, also have to deal with bias and views, perspectives.
So do you bring your personal views in opinions?
In the classroom? Mm-hmm.
In the classroom.
I mean, at least for those who are faculty members or instructors.
Yeah,
I think it's impossible not to an extent. I think that if you have to, because everything, as much objective as we try to be, we're all a little bit, at least a little bit subjective. And most of the time we're more than a little bit subjective. So I think whether we realize whether we're expressing I'm Democrat or I'm Republican or I'm pro-abortion, I'm anti-abortion, whether or not we're explicitly saying that, I think we all, to some extent, bring, because it's who we are in our experiences and what we've got going on in life, it defines who we are. And so that's what's gonna show in everything we do. We have to try, or we should try to be more objective. But I think to a certain extent we're all at least a little subjective.
Point well taken.
Are you all with him or someone with the
Any rebuttals or?
You all support what he says?
But then how do you navigate some kind of power? You've got power in the classroom and as an instructor, now you're telling your students, hey, this is where I stand, how do you make that safe?
And that's what I was saying. That's a good question, because I figure in linguistics, so I have a linguistics background. The big movement in linguistic and second language acquisition and teaching is removing the atlas complex from the instructor. So taking the power away from the instructor, just like in education in general, creating facilitators instead of instructors and teachers. So if somehow you can create yourself as more of a facilitator and include yourself in the group and take that world off your shoulders and you kind of remove power from yourself, then your opinion becomes less of a power position and more of just another opinion in the room. Just another brain in the room, instead of here's what I think and here's how it's going to be. You're another person who's giving an opinion. It's just like somebody in the classroom. But that only works if you're willing to completely take that atlas complex off your shoulders and be a real facilitator, which is really hard to do because it takes giving up power and giving up, which we all love to do.
Yeah, I guess it does hinge on the extent to which you can get rid of the atlas power, because I guess it's also more than the individual instructor. It's also the context and the trappings and these students are at an institution of higher learning, and it's clear that this person holds our grades in their power, or whatever it is. So, but your point well taken. Anyone else?
Anybody else? Can you hear us without the mic? Let's forget the mic then.
Yeah, I feel glued to like a chain,
So I think, maybe one of the approaches, or that for me, it's been very important the way I teach this class in the past or now, is that I tell the students that we are going to learn together. Because I think, especially, as you said, like the importance of the experience. We have in the classroom usually, maybe if we had 17 students this past semester, and half of them experience. They had that perspective that we wanted to hear, and we wanted to be able to have a safe space in the classroom in which discussion was one of the most important pieces of it. So we tried to, as much as we could, to not bring our perspectives in the classroom, and as much as, I mean, as our friend on the right was saying, it's like that's very difficult because we all have our own views, but it's like being aware of where we stand, so then it's easier to be able to kind of hold your own views and also look for these other views to bring in the classroom. We had some topics that, and it becomes very politicized, everything about immigration. So when we will look about some stories about Latinos' experiences with immigration, we were trying to find another Latino experience that was different or oppositional from the one more common and typical. And so in a way, we will base our experiences, like if we didn't have the experience, bring the experience through the readings, through videos, through the classroom and experience of the students themselves, different perspectives that we could discuss. So it was a lot of discuss-based, and it wasn't as much, and again, like, we were facilitators even more than in other contexts, because now Jim and I are experts on this topic. We all come from different backgrounds, and together we decided to facilitate that knowledge, and it was through having an environment in which people were excited to learn from each other, and being open to hear what the other student opinion and experience was on that topic, and having a very diverse classroom facilitated a space in which, and you had to feel comfortable doing that. And I think that's the space. It wasn't as much as like you are going to be graded based on the discussion, but one of our assignments was participation. So you have to actually participate and being able to ask questions and bring your own perspective in the classroom. That was some part of it, but yeah, I don't know if you want to add something about
That's a strategy we decided for a topic like this. Nomenclature, I'm not sure, of neutrality or not bringing our opinions in. That said, I fully agree that, and I'm sure every person would maybe, that we're subjective creatures. Maybe it's a matter of, I think it's a matter of degrees and intention and what kind of perspective or bias you're bringing in. I mean, just ipso facto, creating a course, you're omitting certain information, and you know, that's a perspective that's based on opinion to a certain extent. But I submit that might be different than consciously, explicitly advocating a political point of view. And even that we might even do in ways we're doing that when we're not realizing it. Example again up here. What was your name? The law student?
Oh,
Example?
my name is Marissa. Yeah, so a professor that I had at the law school, he was masterful at this, you know, a law professor, but at countering whatever perspective you were giving. So he could really, I mean, it was such a great instructional model because whatever opinion you expressed, he was able to counter in a really logical, common sense kind of way that made you really understand. It was a constitutional law class. Made you really understand these, you know, different positions that could be defended, and left all of us thinking, I wonder what he actually thinks, because he was so good at doing it.
I think that's a good point. Like kind of questioning, or like every time there is a concept, like why is that, or like what about this other angle, or what about this other perspective?
And granted, most, you know, history, humanities, liberal arts classes aren't going to have the same kind of setup as a law school class where you're expecting to get put on the hot seat and called up and questioned and things like. I mean, to make it more collaborative would be a challenge, maybe, but this mindset makes it a little hard.
I mean, you make a good point. Like the class size is important. We were 17 students. By the end of the semester, we knew each other very well. And so if you have a classroom like this, that's not going to happen.
Well, and if you're being addressed by Ms. or Mr. in your last name when you're getting that, it's a very different setting. So.
Yeah. And we also, maybe one of the aspects we also, in order to bring not just our views and perspectives that we're trying to hold, as many speakers who are experts or not experts, who have experience in that topic. We had people who came from the refugee resettlement, social worker who was from Cameroon. We had a philosopher who come and talk about ethics, about if we get rid of the border, let's think what is the pros and cons of that. And now let's have a fixed border that nobody comes in. What are the pros and cons of that? So kind of like being critical about different aspects and not pretending that we are the ones who know everything, but having a lot of the speakers coming to the class to discuss their own experiences as immigrants, as people who work in the field. When we're talking about like the border, for example, we talk about from the vigilantes, from the people who are medical humanitarians in the border, from the same undocumented immigrants crossing the border, from the police perspective. Because I think the more points of view we get from a topic, the easier it is to maybe more understanding of how the position can change depending on what you do and what is your experience and what is your context. So I think we try to do that in all the different topics we have. And that's not always easier, and of course we don't have all the context or information, and I'm sure that still becomes biased, but as much as we could, we try to bring as many different points of view in the topic as we could. Another aspect that we focused a lot was, and we can look at later, like we talked about controversial topics like female circumcision, and how are we going to use that word, for example? Are we going to talk about mutilation? Because we had a lot of Somali students at UMR and here, obviously. So that was, and talking about a health perspective. So we look at that from a health perspective, from a student or like the Somali person, from also a doctor in Minnesota, how are reacting to having a patient who actually had circumcised and not having perceived that before. So we read articles from Minnesota, and but also like what is the wording that we are going to use? Are we going to use mutilation? Are we going to use circumcision? And how even the word itself can show where you are standing. And so that's kind of a decision of, again, we're talking undocumented immigrants, illegal immigrants. And if we do that, I think we have to discuss that in the classroom, no? Like what does the implication of this word? Or if we say mutilation, what does that imply versus circumcision? And having the students themselves who had experienced circumcision, that was a more controversial topic, no? Like how shouldn't we talk about that? Because this is a very difficult topic. Like, it's very easy. All our students are about health, so that's not healthy, that's dangerous. We have students in the classroom who may or may not. I knew they did, but that had been circumcised. So how are we addressing that? And we were able to do it. And but I think it was about bringing a lot of readings, different perspectives on the topic, the health, the doctor point of view, the Somali perspective, and so then kind of having the discussion there. Nobody had to come about, oh yeah, I'm circumcised or not, but it was a space to be able to understand and also get more knowledge, different types of circumcision, what are the implications of each one of them, what does that happen when they go in the hospital, when they have a kid. So I think going in depth on the topic makes it as less stigmatized, as more like knowledge and understanding and exploring that. So I think that was another aspect that we took. Like rather, if we want to talk about a topic that's controversial, let's go in depth, let's read about it, let's look at different angles and make it as something that we can all learn from it, rather than something that can be uncomfortable.
No, we're just making sure we're honest. There's some of these topics we've already gotten into. So self-cognizant and word choice, I think you addressed to some of that. Again, nothing new under the sun here. If we've thought about how we teach, trying to walk in humility to a certain extent, have some self-cognizant, what we're doing, how are we doing it, how are we approaching it. The word choice part kind of alluded to what, clitoridectomy or mutilation or circumcision, is it undocumented worker, is it illegal immigrant? These sorts of questions that, depending on the verbiage you use, has ramifications. Neutrality. Questioning, well, I think we sort of got into that with the questions, but again, I submit that some instructors, it's important, to kind of use maybe artificial polarities here. Expressing your view is important because inevitably that's going to happen in some way or another. So why not be honest about it? Or the model sort of we heard is if you can get rid of the Atlas power, maybe your view is being expressed as one among many. On the other hand, there are those who, we've all played the devil's advocate to a certain extent, or what have you, but not necessarily revealing your position on something.
Can I add something about that?
Yeah.
I think that was also the questioning of neutrality was something surprising for the students when we discussed discuss it from a medical humanitarianism point of view. That was a key part of the class, and many of the students who are in health, they feel like, oh, they want to help, they want to be in the community and help those in need. And I think for them it was this idea that it's neutral. I'm just going to help these people who are in need. But then through like some videos that show like, well, what does it mean to go and help in a different country? Or what does it mean to go, we put a case study on, in Minnesota, in which there is this clinic in South Minnesota that is based on a church and that they are helping undocumented immigrants through their health needs. And how in the reading experience, how it become politicized, how people in the church complain, they didn't want the church to be involved. And so it's kind of questioning that just the fact that you want to help someone, that doesn't mean that you are being neutral. Just by your actions, that you bring some political view. Even if you don't think you are, that has a political perspective for others. That the fact that you are helping undocumented, that shows that you are pro-immigration, and that can create a backlash. So I think like discussing these topics, first we look at outside the United States, but then inside and see how your actions can never be neutral. That everything you do can have a political connotation. That was something that it was kind of like eye-opening to them and questioning a little bit what medical humanitarianism is and if it can be neutral outside the United States or in the United States.
Okay. Multiple perspectives, just real quick. Here we're referring to not simply bringing other instructors with expertise, but when we're looking at various topics with immigration issues, different players, different stakeholders, different voices, what are they doing? And just trying to look at as objectively as possible, or really in terms of perspective taking, whether it's from the law enforcement angle, the medical clinics, the humanitarian NGOs in the area, the state government authorities, or what have you. And actually that kind of leads into a last bullet here on an example of something we're sort of always rethinking and trying to redevelop the course, and that ties into those various perspectives. I don't know if you want to say something about that.
Well, like we'll see at the end of the PowerPoint, some of the, we did a survey at the end asking the students how was the experience of this course about self-awareness, awareness of others, and it was very positive in general. But also, one of the aspects that they said that was lacking a little bit was the focus on medical humanitarianism, because they are all in health, they really want that focus stronger. So we are actually preparing, like for next semester, during the spring break, we're going to take the students to Arizona, those who want. It's going to be a one-credit optional trip. We're going to go to Tucson and join an organization and spend time with the No More Death organization group who provides water support on the border. We're going to go to Mexico with the Death organization who supports those who are crossing the border when they are in the Mexican side, the detention center, talking with different people over there. So it's going to be a little bit more hands-on and see an experience there. We're going to talk about that in the classroom and have this extra credit for those who want to join us and have a little more like medical humanitarianism perspective in Arizona itself.
What we have here is a list of various topics that the course entails, a course on immigration to a certain extent. We're not going to weigh in all of them necessarily, but how, when we talk about these topics, how they relate to our teaching strategy. And I'll kind of weigh in on, let's say, medical humanitarianism. The thing about that is there were some students who felt there could have been more. Actually, the origins of the course were such that I taught a directed study on that topic. And you already taught this immigration course in an earlier form, and then we sort of combined our efforts. And trying to merge the two topics was kind of a difficult task. But what came out of that discussion is for students thinking about humanitarianism, well, that's a good thing, but we kind of problematize it basically, looking at Médecins Sans Frontières, probably mostly, but not just that organization. The question of intervening or interposing oneself in another country, or the politics and the logistics of it, of humanitarian relief in Haiti, for example, and looking at sort of literature that's critical, and bringing video clips. For example, one of the founders of Médecins Sans Frontières, Bernard Kouchner, sort of controversial figure, but sort of expressing a medical humanitarian point of view, and yet also getting feedback So it was kind of an eye-opener for students, and just another example of a topic that we try to give them other angles, and difficult to negotiate that terrain, I suppose.
Maybe the point is that complicating every topic, like rather than simplifying the concept, we try to complicate each one of them. So by the end, they feel like, I don't know if I feel great or I feel more conflicted about this, which I think that was kind of some of the feedback. Maybe I'll show you too that at the end I asked, well, you will see some of their responses on that. But so those are maybe the kind of the most controversial topics that we focus on. But the idea that complicating them, not simplifying what all these, and we could go more in detail. A lot of the students, maybe because it's medical, were very surprised about medical deportations. And there was a topic that some of them explored in their final project. Well, maybe the course assignment, like how we focus on that class of being, I think the attendance and participation had a big piece of their grade, reflections. So like the way we kind of created this course to be critical and a learning experience and exploratory was focusing a lot of with reflections, discussion in the classroom, and then a final presentation that they did through their own research about a concept we did, or especially we tried to ask them to do focus on immigrant and refugees and do interviews. So we wanted to have a qualitative and a quantitative approach in anything that they did at the end of the presentation. Since most of the students, or half of them or more, were from some immigrant background, they chose to interview family members, community members, and kind of get to learn about themselves and their communities much better while quantifying that information, like having the story plus data about that concept. And we actually opened it to the whole university to come and see those presentations because they were actually excellent. And they had to do a digital story within it. They had to present and also have a digital story where usually the interviews were present there. So like, one of the goals was like to empower and to kind of work on the students' identities, especially for those who were from an immigrant background. So most of them, the any Somali student researched what it means to be an American and by their community members, and they kind of had cultural assimilation, and they really focus on cultural assimilation in academia connected to their digital stories. Indian white students like focus on historification of Pakistan and India, mental health in India, and so that when we talk about mental health, that was also a very critical topic for some of these immigrant and refugees of how their cultures understand and how is it stigmatized, so they wanted to explore that more within their own groups. The Hmong students focus on the Hmong refugee deportation, and they did their own self-study on that and what they knew and their own stories. And then others were more about concepts. Some focus on the Zika virus, medical humanitarianism, and health in refugee camps. So those are examples of what they focus on the final presentation. Like that's an example of what we say, like the discussion-based of the course. One student at the end of the last reflection, when we asked what you learned, a lot of the students mentioned other students, but this one was powerful. You want to read it, Jim?
Okay. I would say that I learned the most from listening to my classmate, Blank, throughout the semester. The way she displayed information about her Somali culture was very insightful. By using different cultural analogies and comparisons, I feel that I was able to get a peek into her culture, which is one that I had never experienced before. In my case, she was able to recognize whenever I had a viewpoint or ideology that may have been rather one-sided or not as open-minded as it should have been. Instead of attacking these viewpoints, she was able to elegantly point out her differing opinions and views. For this, I really respect her.
And we had many other examples of students mentioning how they learn a lot from other students. And I think that's what we try to, we were not the experts, we all were learning together.
Quantitative, I don't know if you have.
Some like, so the students motivate them after the course, most of them like said that they wanted to continue to be involved in the community, do this kind of research, be more connected to this topic, how they felt about it. All of them were able to talk about being excited, motivated about it, but also mentioned anxious, stressful, confused several times. And here we have one example of why they say anxious. You know, I'm anxious about the complexity of these issues we discuss and stressed about how I will try to internalize this knowledge and apply it to my own life. Let's say I feel motivated to continue exploring this topic. There were several examples of saying like I feel more conflicted now. I don't think I fully, but I think that's fine. You know, at the end of the semester, those topics were complicated, but still they were motivated to keep exploring them. And about developer deeper, we asked about did we feel at the end of the semester we developed in this deeper understanding of the immigrant and refugees. Strongly agree and agree was very high. Greater understanding of immigrants and refugees' health experiences, very high. The lowest one was about medical humanitarianism. We have some students that thought we want more of that. That's where we had the lowest. Learning to communicate professionally to people from different backgrounds was very high. Deeper understanding of my cultural self was also very high. And develop sensitivity towards people from other backgrounds was also very positive. And that's all we have. I don't have any questions that we can refer.
You good on time?
Are we in time? Or are we at past?
Maybe the cardinal sin of coming out there without a watch or a clock.
But if you have any questions, I think
Questions, comments, retractions of anything you said earlier, or maybe you have some insights that you want to share, or teaching a grandchild.